Hey guys, welcome back. So we are going to be continuing from where we left off in the last video. We had some discussion on what exactly is a global transaction ID or GTID for short, um, and how it is made, right? So what are the components creating the GTID, and what are the different types of GTIDs related variables that you see in the server when you do something like show global variables like GTID, right? So you have the GTID bin log position, then you have the current position, then of course you have the slave position. What are all these different variables and what do they mean basically? And then we saw the different components of the GTID where you have the domain ID to begin with, the first portion, and then the second portion refers to your server ID of the master, whichever is the current master. This most of the time refers back to that. And then of course the last portion is your transaction ID, the actual sequence number of each transaction that you do on your master node. So in this video, we are going to be doing some manual failover and manual switchover. Right? So we will not be using MaxScale's auto failover and auto rejoin or switchover capabilities, but we are going to be doing all that manually so that you have a very clear understanding that what are the things that MaxScale does in the background in order to do automatic failover and auto switchover. Right. So first of all, let's go to the MaxScale configurations, and then we are going to take a quick look at the config. I believe I have already disabled those two variables like the auto failover and auto switchover. I have already disabled those to false, set to false. So which means that this MaxScale is just going to be monitoring but not doing anything, right? So it's just going to report what it sees on the server. It's not going to do, or it's not going to take any action on the different statuses of the server master or slave. All right. So now we are going to be looking at a scenario where your master node goes down. So how do you go about promoting the slave as a new master, right? So we are going to take a quick look at that. So first of all, let's exit from here, and I'm going to if I could type properly, that would really help. Yeah, let's stop MariaDB on this master node. So it will basically tell us, MaxScale will basically tell us that yes, your master is down, but because this poor guy MaxScale can't really do anything about it, so it's just reporting that yes, your master is down, and then you have a standalone slave running, right? So you cannot do anything there because it's a slave node. Anyway, so let's go to this this second node, which is the slave currently. So if I do show slave status, we can see that yes, this is the slave indeed, and then it's showing an error message saying that it's not able to connect to the master node with this user and of course a particular password because it can't really connect. The reason is obvious, because this node is down, right? So it cannot really connect. That's why this is not doing anything. So what we will do for now is we are going to stop the slave process. So we're going to stop the slave process. The slave is stopped, and then we can see in the MaxScale's output that yes, now this node is running as a standalone server, right? So it's simply running as a standalone server, but we want to have it as a proper master. So what do we need to do? If you remember, the slaves are always running in a read-only mode, right? So if we check show global variables like read only, if we check that variable, and we will see that yes, the read only flag is currently on, which means that this node is running as a read only server. So it cannot be promoted as a master unless we set this read only flag to false. But before that, of course, we need to reset the slave status completely so that it doesn't have any memory of being a slave at all. So what we're going to do is we have already stopped the slave, right? So we are going to do a reset slave all, right? So we'll do that first of all so that it's not a slave anymore, firstly, and then now if we do the show slave status, it will be empty, right? It's already cleared off. And then finally set global read only equals to 0, right? So you can do this equal to 0 or off. Both of them are fine. So as soon as I do that, you will see that MaxScale is now showing that yes, now this node is a proper candidate for being a master. So it's MaxScale is reporting this node as a master node, right? So that's about it. We are done with that. So now we have a standalone master running. Your application can now connect to this IP address, because application needs to be connecting to the master node. Previously, it would have been connecting to this IP, because we don't have a MaxScale, right? So we are simulating that we don't have a MaxScale. So previously, your application connection string would be reporting or would be connecting to this IP. Now they need to switch the connection string to this particular IP, right? So that's how they would manually, you would manually be doing that. So now once you have connected to this node, now you can start doing some transaction, and then your GTID will start to move. For example, I'm going to do maybe show databases, create database, test DB. Maybe let's create a fifth one, right? So we could see that now the GTID on this master is actually reflecting the proper server ID. Previously, it was reflecting the same old GTID from 1000th master, but because there were no new transactions, so there were no new GTID to report, right? So that's why it was simply showing that old GTID. That was the last GTID applied to this particular node as a slave. So now, since we have done a new transaction from this particular node, that GTID now is reflected properly as a master, and then we can see that this is now +1 of this ID, right? So similarly, if I was to do a simple, let's do a 10 minutes run, or maybe even a 5 seconds run of Sysbench on this particular IP. This particular IP is again this one. So I'm just going to run this Sysbench from this server, pushing some data to this node. So let's do that. So you will see that this master will be accepting new transactions, and then you will see the GTID is moving very quickly forward. Okay, yeah, we can see that GTID is moving very rapidly because a bunch of transactions are being generated. All right, so we can see that now that this GTID is very, very far ahead this particular number, right? So we can see that. So if I do that GTID, if I do a quick check on that, now we can see, yes, indeed, my current position, which is going to reflect the master's position, because this node is a master. So it's reflecting that, yes, as a master, your GTID is this number, right? And then this number is should be similar to this same as this number. And also the bin log state should also be reflecting the same number, because bin log state is a mix of all the servers, all the different server IDs or domain IDs maximum number. So this, as a master, this number was 10, meaning 10, 1000, 1 to 200. That's what this number is also showing, that as a master, this was a number. But now as a new master with the server ID 2000, the GTID is this one, right? So this is going to show us the mix of all the GTIDs and domain IDs. But anyway, we don't really need to bother about this number for now, but we just need to see that, yes, the current GTID is indeed 10,2000 and it's 13932. It's very, very far ahead of this slave position, right? So this slave position is when this node was a slave. At that time, what was the last GTID this server applied as a slave, which we can already understand that, yes, this number makes sense, because this number is the same number from the old master. So because these nodes were in sync, obviously, so we can clearly see that this node as a master. So we can do the same thing here, because the server is stopped. So if we do, if we start this particular node, we will see that this node is running as a standalone master or standalone node. It's not really a slave, or it's not really a master anymore, because there can be only one master in the cluster. So if we connect to MariaDB now and show global variable, we can see that, yes, so the current position of this node, because when this was a master, so this current position would have been applicable. the current position of this node when this node went down is the same as whatever MaxScale is reporting, right? So that is correct. So now we are just assuming that we don't have MaxScale, so we don't have a reference point. So this is the output we need to rely on always. So yeah, so we can clearly see that yes, this is correct, and based on the GTID position, this number is also correct. So meaning whatever data that was pushed to the GTID to the bin log is also applied to the server level. So which means that yes, there is no gap in between these two numbers. And this node as a slave was this one. So this node, of course, as a slave, this was a slave quite some time ago, and this number we can clearly see is very, very far behind. So we don't really need to worry about this number at all, because this number was this server was a master previously. So we always need to rely on this number, because when this server went down, this server was a master. So that's why we need to rely on the current position as of now. And this node is currently a master, so that's why we also need to rely on this number, right? So the current position always. Okay, so now what do we do if we want to set this as a master, as a slave? So first thing that we are going to do is set global read only equals to on, right? So we'll set this server to be read only, so that we know that this server is going to be a slave, so it must be read only, because without setting to read only, you cannot set it as a slave. You can set it as a slave, but MaxScale will not recognize it, right? So it's always best practice to have your slaves set to read only. So once this is done, then we are going to take the current position, meaning whatever was the last GTID applied successfully on this server, we want to take that current position and set it as your slave position, right? So now we can see the slave position is very outdated. So of course we want to copy this number, set global GTID slave position equals to this number. And if we do the GTID listing again, we can see that yes, now this one and this one is in sync with the bin log. So this is what we want to see, to make sure that yes, my slave position is also the same as this one and the current position. Okay, so now we are safe. We can run the change master command now. So what this change master command is doing, and that we are telling this particular server that hey, your master is now going to be this IP, right? So this IP is again, of course, is this IP for the new master. So I'm telling this server that your new master node is going to be this IP, and then of course you are going to be using this user and this password for replication, and I want you to use slave position as the starting point for replication, right? So I want you to be using slave position for replication. So now when we enter this command, right, so the slave is already set, and then all we need to do is we need to start slave. So as soon as we start slave, you will see that this will switch from running to slave running, and then this GTID will immediately catch up and will become the same number as this one. And then all the missing transaction would have been already applied to this particular server. So let's start slave. Yeah, you can see that, and you can see immediately it took a few turns, few cycles, but yeah, you can see immediately that this number is actually now in sync with the master, and we have a cluster running healthy again, right? So from one single master, we now have a master slave environment back in action. All right, so if we do the show global variable based on GTID, we will see that all the new GTIDs are reflected now, right? So we can see that everything is in sync. And similarly, show slave status. If we do that, then that would also report the same, no more error messages. And then we can clearly see that yes, these two things are running. And also we can see that the master host is indeed that 74, the actual master. And then we can also see that the current GTID as far as the IO is concerned is this one. So what this IO position means, basically this is the bin log position, right? So bin log position means that whatever GTID has been received in the relay logs by this slave is going to be this number. So there is a possibility that when you check your slave ID as a slave, now because this is a slave node, now we always need to look at this number. We should not be looking at this number at all. We always need to look at this number to see where this slave replication is currently. And so this, we can clearly see that yes, the slave is in sync based on the bin log position, meaning whatever data has been received is this one. The last GTID received is this one, and this is the last GTID applied by the slave to the database is also the same, right? So remember, this is the last GTID that have been successfully applied to the database is this particular number. And yes, on the slave node, this one and this number should be the same always. But the only thing is that this one and this number may have some differences. So this one is most likely going to be higher if your server is very busy, very heavily doing transaction, meaning if your master is doing very heavy transaction all the time, then you might have a higher GTID that has been pushed to this slave but not yet applied. So all the transaction applied are here, right? So this meaning that this server has applied up to this transaction, but this one might be at 20,000, right? So that would mean that there are roughly around 6,000 transactions that are still to be applied on the slave. So this is where you will see some seconds behind master also. So that is also another indicator that your slave is lagging behind. And then the other proper indication would be that if your GTID slave position is behind this particular number, right? So these are two important indicators. All right, so I think that's all about this failover. Now we are going to test how we can do a switchover, right? So that switchover basically means that we have this master. Now we want this master to be back on this original server 1. We want server 1 to be our original master, and this one should be our slave. So if we are using MaxScale, a MaxScale will just be one single command, very simple to do the switchover. Similarly, for failover is already automatic. We all know that. But switchover is a very simple command that we need to execute at the MaxScale level, and that would do a switchover seamlessly. But now you will see that we still have some work to do when it comes to switchover, right? So let's do that very quickly. All right, let's see what do we need to do in order to move this master status to the first server, right? So first of all, what we have to do is we are going to be stopping the slave and resetting the slave status over here. So first, let's do that. Not systemctl. Stop slave, reset slave all. And also, of course, just make sure when we are doing all these things, just make sure that there's no transaction coming into the server, right? So you have to stop your application layer. Of course, you will need to face some downtime as far as your application availability goes. So just something to take note of when you're planning this kind of an activity. Okay. Of course, with MaxScale, this downtime becomes very minimal, but with the manual work, of course, this downtime will have some significance. Okay, so let's stop slave and reset slave all so that we clear away the slave status completely from this node. Now we can see that this node is not running as a slave anymore, and on the original master, what we just need to do is we need to set read only equals to on, right? So we need to convert it into a read only machine. So let's do that. Oops, sorry. Indeed, it should be global read only equals to on. Okay, so as soon as we do that, we realize that the system is automatically converted to a slave. Right? So it's not currently pointing to any other server, but MaxScale knows that this is going to be a slave node. So we need to promote this server as a master. So as soon as we do that, this slave will be pointing to that particular node. So what we are going to do is we are going to say, of course, we would need to have a look at the GTID values. So GTID values, because this was a slave last time, this was a master last time. So we need to make sure that we copy the current position, of course, always, because this was the master. So master would have the higher GTID of these two. We can clearly see. So we'll copy this GTID and do set global GTID slave position equals to this number from the slave position. So as soon as we do that, we can run the change master command. Change master to master host. Now we are telling this node that, hey buddy, your master is going to be this particular IP, right? So back to square one, back to the original master. And of course, a master use GTID equals to slave position. So whatever slave position we have set just now, I want you to start replicating from that particular position. So as soon as we do that and start slave, you will see, okay, let's see. Oh, let's see what's going on. Why is this node still showing as running, and why is it not running as a master? I know the reason. Let's take a quick look at that. Show master status is nothing. So is yeah, we have some bin logs and we have a position. What about the slave status? Show slave status. So slave status is also empty. So this is, I think we have already reset the slave, right? Yeah, we already reset the slave. Show global variables like GTID %. Okay, so let's take a quick look at this. What exactly is going on? Yeah, everything looks okay. And this one, let's clear it one more time. So let's clear it, and to be sure that stop slave, reset slave all, so that we have both nodes running. Is it really reporting anything? Yeah, it is reporting properly. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, there is no slave status. Master status is also correct. And this one is 74, this one is 73, which is correct. Yeah, that's right. It's not a slave, it's not a master. And then what? Oh yes, set global read only equals to off. Yeah, there you go. Yes. So a very basic thing which I totally forgot about, that because this node was a slave just now when we started, and so this node would have been running in read only mode, right? So we need to set the read only mode to off, right? And then we need to do a reset of these two things that we did: reset slave and yeah, reset stop slave and reset slave all. So we would have to, so these are the three things we need to do, right? So just take note of this. So set global read only to off, then stop slave, reset slave all. So these are the three activities that we need to do. So once we have done that, then this node would be a candidate of a master, right? So that's why it's now showing as a proper master. So now on the slave node, of course, on this node, what we would need to do is we would, because this was the master, so we don't really need to do any slave related things. So what we need to do just now is simply set global read only equals to on. So we need to make this read only, right? So that is something important. So as soon as we do that, then we could do a stop slave, and we would do anyway. Stop slave is not needed right now because it would have been a master, so stop slave is not required. So we just need to do this, set this read only equals to on. So enable read only, and then let's clear the screen, and then we would be doing a change master to point to 73, right? So 73 will be the new master, and of course use the GTID slave position. But before that, we would have already done a proper slave position set based on the current position of the. So before we did that, we we would have copied the current position and set it as a slave position, so that the slave position is pointing to the actual current position of this node. And then we would do this one, change master and start slave. This should basically give us the end result that we are looking for. So yeah, so important thing, on the master you should always have read only off, and then you should always have stop slave and reset slave also. It's not slave anymore. So those are the three things that we need to do on the master node, whichever we want to make it as a master, right? So we would always do these three things. And on the original master, which we want to convert it as a slave, we basically just need to set the read-only flag to on. So we want to make it run in a read-only mode, and then just simply run the change master command to now, of course, before that we need to copy the current position and set it as a slave position, and finally run the change master and start slave. And that's where you will get a properly running master slave infrastructure. Now, of course, if we do show databases and maybe drop database testdb5, for example, this should replicate over to the other node also. And also immediately you see the GTIDs have been shifted from the original what was reported as 2000, because this GTID was coming when this node was a master. So this node was, of course, server ID is 2000. So now we created a new GTID from this master. So we are now going to be following the GTIDs of 1000 that immediately we can see in the MaxScale. But also when you do show GTID positions, right, so we can also see that yes, indeed, the bin log is also the same, meaning whatever this master sent is also 1000 GTID, 1000 base GTID, and the current position is also the same, and the slave position is also the same. Right, so just take note that when you are currently working with the slave node, you should always be concerned with the slave position and not the master, not the current position all ever. So current position is always applicable when you are dealing with a current master or an X master, meaning that node was a master last time when it failed, right? Or when it was shut down, right? So those are the important things that we need to know, and always look at the latest GTID, whichever is it, right? So these are the few things that we need to understand. Okay, so I think that's all for this session. The next session will be an important one, or rather I would say interesting one, where we will set up a two-way application where this node is a slave, is a master of this node, and then this node will become a master of this node at the same time, meaning this node replicates to this node and this node replicates back to this node. So it's a circular replication. We are going to see how to set it up. It's also quite simple and quite straightforward, as you would see. But yeah, that's all about for today, and see you in the next video where we set up a circular replication. Take care. Bye-bye.